It's late December, which means it's time for our year in review episode of The Debrief. A few days ago, Jackie and I sat down to talk through our big 5 columns from the past year. What landed, what didn't, and what it all says about where things are headed in 2026. Jackie, of course, writes Doing the Right Thing in the Finger Lakes Times, and my In Focus now lives over on Substack, still occasionally running in the Finger Lakes Times. Before we get to that conversation, a quick note. As we head into our 10th year, the Debrief is evolving. Same core show, but some new formats are coming in 2026. We'll tell you more about those at the end. For now, let's get into our look back at 2025 and what it tells us about the year ahead. Topic number 1 that I wanted to talk about today was dissolving the Fishers Fire Department, which kind of came and went without anybody saying too much about it after the vote happened. So for those who don't remember, the vote happened in June. It came up pretty quickly. There was a real burst of coverage in the Rochester media market, here in the Finger Lakes, of course, too. Vote happened. It was approved. Fast forward to October, it happened, and now we're in this wait and see process. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this, because one of the reasons that I think it's one of the biggest stories of the year, is because we don't actually know if this was a good thing or a bad thing for taxpayers, if this is going to save money or cost money, or how it's going to be handled. And we've talked about dissolution in the municipal sense a lot on this program over the years. And it kind of goes back to a conversation that I had with Matt Horn, I think 3 years ago on Inside the FLX when I still did that show, where the dissolution process, whether you're talking about dissolving a municipality, whether you're talking about dissolving a service, it often leaves a lot of unknowns just kind of floating out there. You can get to the point of voting on and then actually executing a dissolution without knowing too much about what comes next. And this is one of those scenarios because, Fishers Fire District handled 1,300 plus calls in 2024. And, the town of Victor has, on paper, said that it will pick up the difference, and it seems like they are. There haven't been any crazy, reports of fires that have burned out of control because there wasn't adequate coverage or what have you. But eliminating services does not eliminate demand.
Right.
So you still, at the end of the day, have 1,300 EMS and fire calls to deal with, and I just wonder, whenever we get into these situations, no one really pays much attention to it after it happens. And if we do fast forward another year or maybe less than that, do we realize that there wasn't actually a cost savings at all, and we just shuffled line items in a budget from one area to another, and we're paying the exact same thing for service that maybe isn't as good or maybe isn't as organized as it was before?
I guess it seems kind of surprising to me that there wouldn't be that kind of pre-analysis done prior to the vote that would have said, okay, when we take this action, the following things are going to result. And we expect that there won't just be a cost shift, but that instead there would actually be cost savings or improved service or improved opportunities for training or equipment or any of the things that I think consolidation, shared services, dissolution is supposed to achieve. Because, as you know, I am a fan of people pursuing things like this because there are a lot of services that other jurisdictions do on a more regional scale that our Finger Lakes communities tend to be a bit more behind the times on. And I think part of that is tradition and custom and the way we've always done it. And I think the hope is that if you take a new look at it, you do gain something from a new way of doing things. But you're right. If that ends up not being the case, then that would be unfortunate.
Yeah. And I think two other points that at least I was thinking about as I was going through this process. They had tried to dissolve Fisher's Fire Department a few years back. It failed the first time through. New fire commissioners were elected that were into the idea, and that's kind of how it got to that point really quickly. But it's interesting because Victor is one of those municipalities that is, one, growing from a population standpoint, and two, really like spread out, and it's not that easy to get from one side to the other side of Victor, which is, and you've got very rural and you've got very commercial district, like separation as well. And it's just like, I think if there were any community where a lot of due diligence and studying would have been necessary to do something like this, it would have been this area if you're going to talk about merging this kind of service. Not saying that, to your point, that it wouldn't have been a good idea or that it wouldn't net a positive outcome. It's just when you fly through the process the way it did, and here we are, 2.5 months, we're recording this a little before Christmas, 2.5 months after the Fishers actually dissolved, less than 6 months after the vote happened, and you kind of don't really know like what is what, other than the plan that the town of Victor put out immediately after the dissolution happened, or just before. I think they released the plan in late September, and the dissolution happened on October 1st. So again, it's just kind of like, excuse me, yes, fire calls are being responded to and everything seems fine. But it'll be interesting to see how the cost part of it plays out in 2026. What's your first?
Okay. I guess maybe that cues up the column that I wrote about that we need more than just complaining to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think the benefit of local government and small municipalities is that in theory, we've got people who care about issues, who can actually interact with and get close to decision makers, who can then be persuaded to take action in various ways. But unfortunately, I think what we've been seeing in Geneva and some of the surrounding jurisdictions, but I'm going to focus on Geneva as I'm known to do, is that people say, yes, we have a housing crisis, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and someone needs to do something about it. But then when we get an opportunity to do something about it, then the complaints roll in. And then in partnership with that, we've got people who would like to see more opportunities, more retail, who are lamenting things closing, the movie theater, the Freihofers, right? Like a bunch of things that people were upset were going to close, but again, aren't making the link with that population piece to then say, okay, maybe all of our complaints about the projects that are coming forward are also hindering and exacerbating the complaints we have about all the things leaving. And I guess because no podcast we do would ever be complete without it, this causes me to say it'd be nice if we had like a comprehensive plan that would help us figure out what we ought to be doing and the positive steps that we should be taking, as opposed to just this reactionary approach to local government. So that's one of the things that I think I'm hoping will change in 2026.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wrote a somewhat similar, I touched on the same thing, and it was, I think, born out of the same frustration. My good old days column that I wrote, I think it was like 2 months ago. But I was scrolling through Facebook or some of the Facebook groups that I'm in just to sort of keep tabs on what's happening around the area. And I was watching this back and forth among many people, not just two people, but a thread. Someone had posted something that was being developed in the town of Ontario in Wayne County along Route 104, which if you're familiar with that stretch of 104, it's not residential, it's industrial. It's very kind of like, I don't know, it gives like 1990s. It just gives me like a old school, like industrial dying kind of like space. You've got a lot of like businesses there, but everything is very spaced out. It's certainly not walkable. And you would think that's exactly where you want development to happen. And there was something that was being developed there or being proposed to be developed there. And there were dozens and dozens of comments of people like fighting with each other about not wanting that thing. And like, basically like type yelling at the original poster who was just saying like, hey, isn't it good that we're actually getting this? And it's funny because I saw that pattern repeat over and over again. I'm just talking about this portion of Wayne County, but whether it was a housing proposal like apartment complex, or whether it was the Aldi grocery store, which is just about done now, just outside of the main corridor that I'm talking about of 104 in Ontario, or literally anything else, there's just this like constant barrage of, we don't want to become Webster. We don't want to become this, or insert your quote unquote busy place. And it's just interesting because it's like, these same people are the ones who I listen to lament how no business can be successful because it's so unaffordable to do business in New York State. And they'll talk about taxes, and they'll talk about this, that, and the other thing, unfunded mandates. But you need customers. Your business needs customers. And when businesses fail, it's because they didn't have enough customers to tip the scales the other way, right? Like it didn't outpace what the cost was to do business. And we have such a shortage of housing, and we are going to talk about housing more so coming up here in a few minutes. But that's just it. Communities wind up fighting housing harder than they've fought the economic decline that's happened for the last 25 years.
And it is this strange contradiction where we've got the same group of people saying, I like things the way they are, and I hate the way everything is.
Yeah.
And those two are not compatible. I mean, but they seem to be kind of the slogan a lot of times when projects are proposed.
And there was one thing that I wrote down responding to some emails that I got after I wrote that column, and it was, a community can change by choice or by consequence, but change is not optional. And that is sort of like what I kept coming back to as I was having conversations with people. It's like, you can be the architect of that change, or it can be the kind of change that isn't what the community wants or needs or can sustain its future self.
Right.
Whether that means keeping taxes relatively flat or low, or whether that means creating an environment where new businesses can come in and flourish. You need more people. You need to encourage development. You can't just be no, not in my backyard on every single project that comes to town. And, I didn't mention it, but we've all seen, I think if you live in the Finger Lakes, you see at least one, oh no, there's another car wash coming post on Facebook per week.
Yeah.
I think that's the minimum. If you're unlucky like me, you see it like once a day. And it's like, why do we have that? Because, and it's funny because I look at it as like, why do we have so many car washes? Because a lot of communities are just pass-through towns.
Right.
They're like people are commuting through, and there's a half dozen, I guess there's like a half dozen conglomerates where you can have a membership and you could stop at any of the car washes that they represent. But like that's the meat and potatoes of it. It drives me crazy. Like,
it's almost like you had a community that tried to make its slogan, "We're the gateway of the Finger Lakes," which is exactly the pass-through attitude that you're talking about, which is why that slogan has always driven me crazy. We want our area to be the capital of the Finger Lakes, not the pass-through. But if you are the pass-through and you announce that to everybody, get ready for the car washes.
Yeah, it'll happen. You know what? I'm gonna touch on this one because we're right there. We're like right on the edge of it. last month I wrote a column about supporting local. It came up after another one of those debates. A new gym opened in Geneva. I'm not going to say the name of the gym because I don't want to get into that. But there was like this moral test that was happening in the comments where people were going back and forth, like sort of like pointing their finger at each other saying, you should be supporting local. No, you should be doing what is best for you. No, you should. And it was really interesting because it's kind of emblematic of the same thing. Like, yeah, when you have population decline, when you have economic viability of communities in decline, you end up with a lot of national chains. And, fighting over whether a gym is corporate owned or locally owned, when corporations rule the day, if you live in a place like Geneva, like as much as there is a really vibrant small business scene in Geneva, your healthcare, your groceries, and your hardware are all likely coming from big chains.
Right.
And if not for those chains, at least on the grocery side of things, if not for Walmart and Wegmans, and I know Wegmans is not Walmart, but Wegmans is still very much a national chain at this point. Like calling them, they're not a small business. Like,
well, they were just featured on 60 Minutes, right? As like the greatest grocery chain ever, which I don't dispute.
I was going to say, like, yeah.
But yes, they've gone national. Yes.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things where, like, the hometown grocery store, the grocery store that's owned by the family that has lived in town for 2 generations, like that's gone. And like, if we're going to talk about like how you create a viable, truly local economy, you need to get those things first. And fighting about whether someone chooses and can afford a $15 or $25 gym membership versus a $50 to $100 gym membership, that's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. Like, I'm pretty confident all the gyms in Geneva are going to be okay. But it goes back to that like prior point of, just shaming people and using like support local as like a moral test of whether you're a good actor or a bad actor in the local economy, when literally everyone is patronizing the corporations that made a truly local economy not work in a place like Geneva over the last 2.5, 3 decades. It loses its teeth.
Yeah, I mean, I am a shop local advocate. I'm not going to, it would be hypocritical of me to say that is my exclusive spending, because it certainly is not. But I mean, I am sensitive to those arguments. But again, to your point, oh, and I need to correct myself. It was not 60 Minutes. It was CBS Sunday Morning. So sorry, for accuracy's sake. But I think, if people are saying they want local businesses to thrive, that needs to happen through deep engagement with local government. Those are zoning questions. Those are policy questions like housing. Again, you have to create the conditions for local businesses to thrive. It's not enough to just hope local businesses will provide what you need, and then you'll have the option to choose them over a national chain. Because like you said, if your city has operated in a way where national chains see it as easy pickings, another Dunkin' Donuts, another, franchise instead of local, then you've kind of done it to yourself. The community has to get engaged and say, you know what, we don't want those outcomes. We don't want the second Dunkin' Donuts. We want all our local coffee shops to do well. Okay, then how can we make sure our zoning doesn't make it easy for someone to just pick a vacant lot when we should have been using that and could have been using that for housing? And instead, it's perfectly zoned for a drive-through small operation on a intersection that is then going to become really congested and less attractive for housing.
And one of the other points to kind of piggyback off of that catches the other side of that coin is the idea that people are making purchasing decisions on ideals of whether they want to support local or whether they don't want to support local. Most of the decisions are based on cost. Most families
Well,
make decisions based on
okay,
cost.
maybe that's true, but sorry, let me put my ethics professor hat on. I do believe that there are you do live your values through your spending. So I understand that, yes, lots of people are saying in this economy, I just need the cheapest option. But first, I think it's not necessarily the case that local options are more expensive. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention places in particular, but
Feel free.
I mean, for example, there's a lot of stuff you can get at Marilla's. There's a lot of stuff you can get at Stomping Grounds in downtown Geneva that price point by price point would be cheaper than going to a national chain for. So I think first, people need to check the assumption that it's always more expensive to shop local. But second, I think it is the case that if it's something, I mean, we do a lot of discretionary spending. So we do need to kind of interrogate our choices and say, okay, if this is something that I've determined that I need, is it the case that I must buy it the cheapest way possible? And I understand for a lot of people, that is not a choice. There is no option. There is no discretion. But for other people, I think there is some discretion, but I think other factors like convenience factor into it. And, sorry, I just need to say that I do think there is a moral element to it, but
So I guess my pushback to that would be, and I would use the county's housing study that showed frankly, an alarming percentage of the population is living either rent burdened or mortgage burdened. And I'm not like, obviously some people are going to listen to that and be like, well, if you are, then why are you paying for a gym membership? Okay, like that notwithstanding, I just think kind of like, I understand the ethical point you're bringing up. I just think in practice, when we look around at the world as it currently sits, the moral test feels like a mistake to me, especially when we're talking about something like a gym membership as opposed to something like groceries or something like that. Because at the end of the day, discretionary spending is just what's left over after people figure out how they're going to survive. And that's kind of like where, choose your battle, choose a little bit of choose your battles is where I was coming from with that column. But yeah, I mean, it would be great if everything was just local.
Yeah.
It would be, frankly, like, I think of this, and this is just a random musing of mine, but I kind of think about like, what would local economies look like if instead of being this giant global chain was instead this hyper local one where the Finger Lakes actually relied on the Finger Lakes,
right.
Or towns even, or, counties even were actually trying to figure out ways to self-sustain rather than just rely on the big players. Obviously, I don't think market conditions would ever be such that like, the corporations are going to allow that to happen. But, it's kind of like one of those dreamer scenarios where it would be like, yeah, that would be the ideal scenario in my mind.
Well, can I use that as a segue into one of my columns then? That I think I tagged to you as let's end our environmental freeloading or something. So I think part of the issues that we're facing is that are that we have these economic conditions and we have these need for more robust participation that are leading some national entities to target the Finger Lakes as a place that they can get their stuff done without a ton of resistance or in a way that is not serving the public good in terms of health, wealth, prosperity, opportunity. And my examples of that are the Bitcoin mining at Greenwich, the data centers proposed at on Cayuga Lake, and the landfills. And I think, without that kind of robust, protective zoning, economic policy, legislative wherewithal, we end up as the dumping ground, not to just talk about landfills, but we do end up as the dumping ground for everyone else who has figured out how to protect their own community from the things that we're then being subjected to. And I would hope that in 2026, we'll see more awareness of the fact that our lakes can't continue to handle this burden. Our air can't continue to handle this burden. Our land cannot continue to handle this burden. And that maybe people will mobilize even more. I mean, we have groups and individuals who are doing a lot of the work to raise awareness about this and talk about what's going on. But I just hope that we can get more policies in place that make it less easy, so I guess more difficult for some of these operations to think, oh yeah, we'll put that in the Finger Lakes. We'll get a tax break. They'll welcome us with open arms. We'll pull out all their water. We'll pollute the air, and we'll extract all the money and resources we need, and then we'll move on and shut down.
Thank you for that segue, because I was trying to figure out which one of these columns I wanted to go to next. But actually, it was one of the more interesting proposals I've ever seen. I don't know if I even sent it to you at any point over the last few weeks, but so there was a proposal in Ithaca to change the way small projects are handled from an administrative standpoint. So, okay. What was it? What's this policy that I'm talking about? Okay, so right now, if you are a local person who is trying to develop, say, a 10-unit multi-use kind of like building, whether it's housing, we want to do a mixed-use thing, or whatever the case may be, you are treated the same as someone who's trying to develop a 200-unit space. And this policy in Ithaca essentially takes anything under 14 units and hands it off to city staff to answer the questions that typically are answered by planning and zoning staff. So all the environmental stuff and all of those kinds of things. The review still happens, like all of the technical reviews that occur happen. They just aren't being spread out over a long period of time. So what often happens and what challenges a lot of like local development in the housing space is months and months and months of waiting for 30-day meeting cycles to catch up, because if a zoning board or a planning board has questions, they may send something back. And I say that as someone who sits on a zoning board, and sometimes you have a question and you send it back and they have to wait 30 more days to come back and answer the question before they can get their approval to go to the next step. And it's one of the biggest roadblocks that exist for people who aren't giant developers, who don't have extensive resources to throw at this really like arduous process, and it just discourages it. And, we talk all the time about how many units short we are, and I don't have that note in front of me, but, I think across the state, we're short like something like 800,000 housing units. One of the fastest ways to see that develop isn't, waiting for big developers to come in and say, I'm willing to go through this, 30-month process to build 600 units. Let's have 24 quote unquote mom and pop developers say, hey, I'll put up 10 units, I'll put up 12 units, I'll put up 6 units. All of a sudden, if more communities adopted this type of zoning policy, all of a sudden you could have 200, 300, 400 units coming online every year for the foreseeable future and be like legitimately eating into that deficit that we have.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think some people are going to hear that. And the moment you said Ithaca, people are either opposed to it or they're no longer listening. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, this is happening nationwide. This idea of it's not a pre-approval per se, but it is, okay, we know that these are the objectives we're trying to meet. This is the kind of housing that we're trying to achieve. So we're going to identify parcels where that's possible. And on those parcels, here's what we're going to allow with, and it is a kind of a fast track review process. And that could serve our local area so well. I mean, you go back to the discussion we were just having about supporting local businesses. I mean, how many downtown businesses could have been more viable longer if the redevelopment of their upper floors was not something that was so mired in red tape? Because in Geneva, for a long time, no upper story housing was even allowed. New housing, that was something that wasn't permitted. And look at how many, what they call like non-activated buildings we still have that could be housing units if we put our minds to saying, okay, the regulatory hurdles we're going to take care of up front, and then we're going to try to streamline this process. So I say 3 cheers to Ithaca for once again paying attention to what's going on nationally, adapting it, picking it up for a way that works in their local community, and solving problems.
Yeah, and look, like it's not even. Yeah, sure. Some people listening will hear Ithaca and say, no. But if we're actually just look at the policy,
right,
it's actually pretty similar to what happens in a lot of conservative states from an execution standpoint. So, like forget everything else. It's really just easing the bottleneck that exists within the regulatory system now. But one of the things that I was thinking about afterwards, because a lot of the feedback that I got was, wow, this is an awesome idea. Can you send me the proposal? Which I did. But this applies to so many other things too, like restaurants, cafes, third spaces in general, the things that, every community, outdoor seating,
any policy like that. Yes.
Oh my God, daycares, all these things that we, even rooftop solar in some communities is kind of like a tricky thing to get around. You have all these different things that we've acknowledged we either want more of or there's a shortage of. And there is a way to make these things happen faster, cutting through the red tape, streamlining the process in every community. You just got to do it.
Right.
And it's one of those things I wanted to end on a positive note, but I guess we're not going to end on a positive note.
About that topic, because I was about to take us to housing.
Yeah, well, take us to housing because I want to talk about housing too.
Okay. Well, I wrote a column about the county housing plan. And, it was basically like, thanks for telling us what we already know, which I understand was kind of a cheeky response. But I think my point, and this continues to be my point, although I do want to acknowledge that there has been some movement. My point with that column, which remains my point, is that this is an immediate need that we are so far behind on meeting that we do need to be putting our resources, our time, and our attention into moving things, right? Into trying new things, figuring out if they work or not, institutionalizing them if they do, abandoning them if they don't, moving on to something else. And one of the things I identified was that in that consultant's report, I think the number one priority was get a housing coordinator in Ontario County. The county does not have a housing department, which boggles my mind, given the fact that it's one of the only growing upstate counties. I mean, housing is part of your economic development. It is key to your economic development. How has the county not had a housing director? So that piece of it, I felt, yes, the things that get tracked get done. And if there is no single person accountable to anyone for housing gets left behind. So I understand that 2026 might bring about a housing director, and that would be a wonderful thing. And I'm glad to see that the board is putting some, their budget reflects some priority on housing. But housing solutions, in my view, need to be the number one policy priority, at least for Ontario County, if not for the surrounding counties, because it's too little too late what's happening right now.
It is, because you're not going to have you're going to lose your momentum in economic development
Right.
if you don't vastly improve the housing situation soon. And now there are other factors that are affecting the development of housing units in Ontario County, which is a separate. That's kind of the next fight, so to speak, is trying to figure out how the county can move forward, given the power situation in Ontario County. But
we ought not to approve any of these data centers, which create an additional drain on the power supply if we know that's a limiting factor for housing. But sorry, not to connect threads across topics, but
and it's a good point. I think the one part, when I read your column, I actually felt like it was spot on in terms of the point you were making.
Oh, I thought you didn't like it. Oh, okay.
What I think was missed, and I still feel like is a bit missed by most people who are heavily involved and watch politics very carefully and regional issues and stuff like housing, is there's always this underestimation of how little the general public actually knows about the situation. And that so much of what the county has tried to do in terms of like just educating the public has been just that, just trying to set the stage. Because newsflash, the average resident does not read I don't even know how long the housing report was. It was very long, very thorough, a lot of good information in there. But, and that is one of the things that to me is kind of frustrating about how municipal government operates, whether you're talking about a city, whether you're talking about a town, whether you're talking about a county. Comprehensive plans, you talk about it all the time. People don't read these things. They're heavy. They're very like wonky, little nerdy to want to sit down and read one of these things. But I think more municipalities, more communities need to do the work of actually like telling the stories that live within the documents, these studies, these reports, if they want the community to take the issues that they're studying seriously.
Right.
And that's kind of where the disconnect was, I think, between us on that particular column. Was just like, it was, you're thinking on it from a very high level, and this was just, it had to be a very like low level explanation of what the situation is, because so many people still have real questions, which, funny enough, last thing that I wanted to talk about today was a column I just ran over the weekend. It was about housing, and it was about a conversation that I had with a reader after one of the last housing columns went out. And I titled it Dialogue in 2025 because it's so hard to have conversations with people who are using nostalgia about the past or their own lived experience from decades past as their like core reasoning for why the policies or the data or the information that is being widely accepted, right, left, center, everywhere on the political spectrum, is wrong. And that is exactly what the interaction was. And the whole column was just sort of like an explanation of what it was like talking to this person. And I'm talking, there were probably like 8 or 9 email exchanges throughout. And it was every time a piece of data or information was presented that contradicted the narrative that they held about the situation, whether it was, Gen Z and millennials are lazy, people in their 30s should get better jobs and not work in the service industry. If they can't afford rent or if they can't buy a house, they should work harder. They should live with roommates, which I thought was actually a really funny thing. Like, if you're someone in your 60s or 70s and you're yelling at people in their 30s or approaching 40 that they should be getting roommates because
well, maybe they like the show Three's Company and they're thinking that looked like fun. Why don't people just get roommates?
Weren't those characters like in their 20s?
I don't know. I mean, they looked old to me, but yeah, I think that was
I think if we actually did a little digging on that, I think we might find that the portrayal of those characters was actually in their 20s, which again is just like, it's so interesting. But so and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this was because I had written the whole column. It was done like middle of last week. And I was scrolling through Pew, and I just happened to, they literally like last week, the day after I finished writing, published a piece, basically a report, showing that 45% of Americans say they would choose to live in the past, and only 14% would choose to live in the future. And all I like kept coming back to was like, man, when people are that oriented to the past, the present and the future, like selling anyone on the present or the future is really hard.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, it's pretty remarkable because I think housing is one of those like very pragmatic, practical like issues of the day where like all of the data is pointing to the same thing. We're short in units. We don't have enough units to go around, rental units or actual like owned housing units. We aren't really thinking about it, housing in like unique ways. We're just kind of like rinsing and repeating the same old stuff. And the situation keeps getting worse for the generations that do not already own assets.
Right.
While things like wages continue to not meet the demand that's been created by short supply. And it's just like no one will do anything in earnest to shake free one of those, because you could shake free one of those things and you would create some movement in it, right?
Yeah.
And there's very little real effort being done to shake free the lock that's in the system right now. I mean, it was like, 2 years ago or 3 years ago now when Governor Hochul made the promise to deliver, I think it was like 800,000 units by 2030 or something like that. That was quickly walked back because of the resistance that existed at the town level across New York State. And, that's just one of those things where, we talked earlier about the good old days and, what communities really need. They really need more people. And, if you're resistant to housing, like, people have been resistant to new housing in the last few years, you very well could find yourself extinct in another few years as community.
Yeah, and I think that was my part of where I was going with the housing column is that not just to pick on Ontario County, but a lot of times the people making the decisions are the people who loved the past. And then they say, well, that wasn't my experience. I bought my house for $75,000 and it's paid off now. And, I don't see what the complaint is. And it's like, you wouldn't be able to buy your house today with the job you have if you were entering the market right now. So we need to have a little bit of not just compassion, but reality check about what's actually going on. Because if people think, well, people should just do things differently like I did, we end up in this kind of why bother public policy posture where people say, well, I don't need to fix it. I don't really need to do it. Someone else needs to do something. Why should I bother trying to change things when it's somebody else's problem? And that really is kind of the death knell of change, because when people who could make a decision to do something differently think, well, what's the point? I liked it better the way it was. Nothing's gonna fix this. Why should I be involved? Then that's a foregone conclusion that you're going to be headed in the wrong direction. So I do worry about that. But I have hope and optimism for 2026.
As do I. As we head into 2026, the debrief is changing, and it's intentional. If you've been with us for a while, you've seen the show evolve. Different formats, different conversations, different ways of trying to make sense of what's happening in our communities. And as we enter our 10th year, we're keeping the core of the show intact, but expanding how we do the work. The discussion style episodes aren't going anywhere, but we're adding 2 new formats designed to go deeper and, frankly, be more useful. The first is the 2-minute drill, led by Jackie. For years, people have asked us the same questions. How did that decision get made? Why does this board exist? What's the difference between a county manager and a county administrator. Local government is complicated, inconsistent, and often opaque. The 2-minute drill is about cutting through that. Short, clear explanations you can actually carry with you. No insider language, no filler, no fluff. The second is In Focus, a long-form interview format centered on issues and solutions. It shares the name of my Substack and old column for a reason. This is about conversations, not the same old politics that brought local government to where it is today. It's about understanding problems at the system level and talking honestly about what would move the needle and what wouldn't. It's also a clear line away from the traditional reporting and toward community commentary, insight, and analysis. Different lane, different goal. And that gets to the bigger why behind all of this. Small communities across upstate New York are under real strain. People feel it in housing, in taxes, in services, and opportunity. There's a growing appetite for change, even if there isn't clear consensus on what that change should look like. What's frustrating is that many of the solutions are neither radical nor impossible. They're just buried under habit, inertia, and really bad incentives. That's what we're trying to surface. So that's what's coming in 2026. We'll have more details online along with this episode. But for now, thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next year.